But then he was disappointed. He left the political arena of India, went to London, settled there, started his legal practice. But in 1932, Iqbal went there for the second roundtable conference and met him. At that time, Iqbal injected into him the concept of Islamic revival. Actually, protection of Muslims was a negative attitude based on fear. But to revive Islam and to show to the world a model of Islamic state, that was the positive purpose. He injected it, and he persuaded him to come back to India and lead the Muslims. From that time onwards till his death, he was repeating this lesson given to him by Iqbal: Islam, Islam, Islam. And because the emotions, sentiments of the Muslim masses, due to these four mujaddids, they might not be practicing Muslims, but they had the influence in the subconscious mind, collective subconscious mind, of the concept of a revival of Islam. They gathered together under the banner of Muslim League. And the election of 1946, Muslim League came out as the sole representative of the Muslims of India, which could not be put off, bypassed in any solution of the future of India after independence. It had a say. Now, leaving here, now I come to, along with Iqbal, we had three more very important persons. Number two was Kalam Azad, who died in 1958 as the Education Minister of India. He was influenced and inspired by the poetry of Iqbal. In 1913, he established a party called Hizbullah, the party of Allah. And he stated that aim of this party is to establish the kingdom of Allah on earth. I may say kingdom of heaven on earth, but it was Hukumat-e-Ilahiyya, kingdom of Allah on earth. And it was based on Bay'ah. Bay'ah means oath of personal allegiance. I accept you as my leader, I will obey you. Within the parameters of the Sharia, if you give me some commandment order which contravenes the Sharia, I won't accept, I won't obey. But if it is within the parameters of the Sharia, I will accept, I will obey. I'll give you my opinion, my advice, but the decision will not be made through majority vote of the party. The decision will rest with you personally. This is Bay'ah, the institution for the basis of organization in Islam, which is mentioned in Quran, in Hadith, in Sirah, life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But till that time, the orthodox ulama, I have told you before, that they had a limited concept of Islam as a mazhab only. Actually, the revolutionary concept of Islam was revived by Iqbal, saying that this is deen, not mazhab. There can be no dichotomy between mazhab and deen and siyasat. जुदा हो दी सियासत से तो रह जाती है चंगेजी. If our politics is separate from our religion, then it is all tyranny, not Islam. But on that basis, the first practical attempt was made by Kalam Azad. He was very close to Sheikhul Hind also. So these two influences worked on him. The Mujaddid of the 14th century Hijrah, Sheikhul Hind, Maulana Mahmud Hassan, and Allama Iqbal. The reviver of the revolutionary concept of Islam. But because I told you, the ulama in general were sticking to that limited concept of mazhab. There is a very incisive couplet of Iqbal. I'm sorry you can't appreciate it. By translation, you know, that real spirit cannot be transmitted. मुल्ला को जो है हिंद में सजदे की इजाजत, नादा ये समझता है कि इस्लाम है आजाद. The Maulvi, the Mullah, because he is allowed by the Britishers, you can pray, you can keep fast. He thinks that Islam is free. Islam is not free. Islam as a deen is downtrodden under the feet of the Britishers. मुल्ला को जो है हिंद में सजदे की इजाजत, नादा ये समझता है कि इस्लाम है आजाद. Islam is not free. It will only be free when it is established as a deen. So I told you that ulama rejected him, and frustrated by this attitude of the ulama, he wound up and then joined Indian National Congress for the struggle for independence. In 1920, for 7 years he was working under Hizbullah, and he also added to the call for going back to Quran. He also did it. Then a few years after this rolling of the bed of Hizbullah, appeared Maulana Maududi on the scene. Accumulating the influences of Abul Kalam, of Iqbal. He established Jamaat-e-Islami in 1941. The sole objective which was stated in the beginning was the same word, Hukumat-e-Ilahiyya, Kingdom of Allah. He borrowed it from Abul Kalam Azad. But later on, when a Quranic scholar joined his hands with him, then the term was adopted, Iqamatud-Deen, to establish the deen of Allah. It is derived from an ayah of Quran, Aqimud-Deen. It's your duty, O Muslims, to establish the deen of Allah. Now, along with Jamaat-e-Islami, talking about India, but it must be noted that it was a pan-Islamic sort of thought. These movements were contemporary, starting from Indonesia, Masjumi Party, India, Jamaat-e-Islami, Iran, Fidayin, and from Egypt started the big movement of Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimun. Nearly the same thought. And this thought came to the surface on the basis of the ending of the colonial rule. Now when we are free, we should practice our Islam as a total deen. So these movements started nearly simultaneously. Nobody could succeed anywhere. Maududi also failed badly. Maulana Maududi also contributed to that movement of going back to Quran, going back to Quran. He wrote an exegesis of Quran, keeping in view especially the modern educated people, to reach their minds, their brain. And he expounded the politico-socio-economic system of Islam. This is the Islamic state, and I take him and accept him till today, although I left his Jama'ah about half a century before. But till this date, I admit, the greatest political thinker of Islam of the 20th century was Maududi. I quoted that he coined that term of theodemocracy. He wasn't. His writings on the concept of Islamic State, they are, I think, till date, till today, the best and most comprehensive. His thoughts about social system of Islam were also 100% correct, and I agree with them. Only regarding the economic system, he remained somewhat backward. He could recognize the evilness of interest on cash, but not the interest on land, absentee landlordism. He declared it to be lawful, which I told you was declared by Abu Hanifa as haram, forbidden. By Imam Malik, forbidden. By Shafi, forbidden in open field, only allowed when there is some crop under a garden, in a garden, but not in the open field. So this was his shortcoming. He was short of the spirit of the time. For the revival of Islam, these things have to be made clear. Number two, but here, before I go to number two, I must accept that by and large, his exposition of Islamic system of life is correct. And he did it in a very simple language, easy, and using the terminology of the time so that he could reach the minds of the modern educated people, in which he succeeded. I am myself one of his followers. But what were the lacking points? Number one, I told you, absentee landlordism. Number two, all his emphasis was on Islam as a politico-socio-economic system, not on Iman. The basis of Islam is Iman, the living faith, the burning faith, the personal conviction in the existence of Allah and His attributes, His unity, burning faith in the life hereafter, that is the real life, not this. The emphasis on Iman was not there, as if it was taken for granted, just as the religious movements, the other, they take it for granted because he is a Muslim, he is a Mu'min. No. That is why I started, my second lecture was the difference between Islam and Iman. So no movement, Islamic movement, can succeed unless it succeeds in taking the roots of Iman to the depths of the hearts of the people. So this was his primary mistake. I have discussed about it in that pamphlet, Islamic Renaissance. But when he came over to Pakistan, For 6 years, he was true to his methodology that he initiated, derived from the seerah and life of Muhammad. He kept true. He kept away from the Muslim nationalist movement, Pakistan movement. He said, if this movement succeeds, another Muslim nation state would come, not Islam. Because the people who are running this movement, they are not practicing Muslims even. Qaid Azam was not a practicing Muslim. The majority of the leadership of Muslim League was not practicing Muslims. So another Muslim state would be added to already existing. To form and establish Islamic State, you have to follow a special strategy and methodology to be derived from the methodology of Muhammad. But when he came over to Pakistan after partition, for 3-4 years he retained his revolutionary ideology and revolutionary methodology. And the first achievement was that he now owned, co-opted the slogan of Muslim League. Why do we want Pakistan? For Islam. Using that sentiment and slogan, he said, now because Pakistan has been established on this basis, the constitutional foundation of this state should be on Islam. He edited a demand, and this demand, his party, although very small party, but very active, very committed people, they propagated it, demand. And all the Muslims supported it. Even the sincere Muslim Leaguees, they supported it. The result was that the objectives resolution was passed in 1949, which stated, I told you the first principle of Islamic State is that sovereignty belongs to God. It is in clear words, sovereignty is for Allah. We have no claim over sovereignty. All the powers or authority that we have is a sacred trust to be used within the limits of the Sharia, book of Allah and the tradition of His Prophet. So it was a big success, and so to say, the foundation stone of Khilafah was established. Then there was a hue and cry. Whose Islam will you establish? The Shia Islam, the Sunni Islam, the Barelvi Islam, the Deobandi Islam? Whose Islam? Then the other great achievement was of the ulama. 31 ulama gathered at Karachi, representing all the sects, all shades of opinion. And they adopted 22 principles of Islamic constitution and agreed upon by all, Shia, Sunnis, Barelvis, Deobandis, Ahle Hadith, Jamaat-e-Islami, and so on and so forth, the top leadership, to silence those who were objecting, whose Islam will you enforce? But the very next year, Maulana Maududi committed the biggest blunder, Himalayan blunder of his life. He thought that we had adopted the slogan of Muslim League, Pakistan for Islam, and we started a movement of demand of the constitution on that basis, and we succeeded. Now if we enter the election arena with this slogan, we shall be returned to power, and then we shall use the whole government machinery to change the thinking pattern of the people, to reform them Islamically, etc., etc. So he decided to enter the power politics arena of this country by participating in elections in 1951. And that was the biggest blunder. He realized only after 20 years that he had committed a mistake. In 1971. But at that time he was too old. He couldn't hold the reins of power of the movement in his own hands and lead the movement. Anyhow, what happened with this was, please note my words, that Jamaat-e-Islami, which was before that an ideological Islamic revolutionary party, turned into an Islam-loving national political party. These three versus three. Ideological Islamic revolutionary party. It was changed into an Islam-loving but national political party. Now, I was, from my very early, I should say, when I was only a 5th class student, I started reading Iqbal. I was influenced by his poetry. That was the first impression. Then I was impressed by Maududi and Abul Kalam. When I also migrated to Pakistan from India, I joined Jamaat-e-Islami's movement. Firstly, this student section, Islamic Jammu, and I rose to the position of the Nazim-e-Ala of Jammu. But then I came to the conclusion that Jamaat-e-Islami has taken a wrong turn. It's no more an Islamic revolutionary party, and this is going to be doomed. So I parted my ways after writing a note of dissent comprising 225 pages in a book now. It is now in a book form. An analysis of the movement of Jamaat-e-Islami. What it was originally and what it became after the independence of Pakistan. Now I myself, I told you, under the influence of Iqbal, Maududi, Abul Kalam, I started Tanzeem-e-Islami. I started my mission in 1965 independently. My first emphasis was on Iman through Quran. First, the foundations of Iman have to be taken down in the heart. They take a nation's pillar deep. What is that couplet of English poetry? Not gold, but only men can make a people great and strong. So, to take Islam, Iman, to the depths of the heart, through Quran. Quran gives you a faith with an intellectual element. Faith, not a blind faith, but a faith with understanding, with an intellectual element. And most of my time has been spent in this. I found Markazi Anjuman Khuddam-ul, the Central Society of the Servants of the Quran, on the pattern of the Society of the Servants of Bible. That was established in 1972. Then 3 years later I established Tanzeem-e-Islami, taking the same original pattern of Jamaat-e-Islami, differing only in 2 things. I revived the institution of Bay'ah. It's not a Western type constitutional based organization where the leaders are elected. No. The leader is the one who has called you for this ideal and this. He is the leader. And you have to give your Bay'ah, your oath of allegiance to him. You can advise him, you can give your opinions, but the decision will not be by the counting of your votes, but the decision will rest with the Amir. I think this pamphlet is also included in that set. The institution of Bay'ah, the foundation of organization in Islam. The Prophet took Bay'ah The caliphs took bay'ah. Even the kings took bay'ah. The Sufis, for the purification of souls, took bay'ah. Mehdi Sudani, when he was fighting against the Britishers, took bay'ah. Sanusi in Libya, based on bay'ah. Sayyid Ahmad Barelvi, bay'ah. Imam Shamil, bay'ah. Good. This is the basic foundation of Islamic organization. And number 3, I have further cleared or formulated the methodology of Islamic revolution derived from the seerah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It was a great blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He gave me the strength to write this book. Islam cannot be established as a deen except by the methodology inferred, derived from the methodology of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that is going to be the subject of my talk in the evening. Now, my organization, Tanzeem-e-Islami, I have, due to old age, given up the imarat and leadership of the party. And I have nominated. Here we have nominations, no elections. A new leader has been nominated. I am there. Now as an honorary member. I obey him now, although he is my son. But he is a Amir. So the response that we have got up till this date and time is very limited. The general religious scene is occupied mostly by the sectarian ulama's groups. Sectarian, based on sects. And then these two movements, Tablighi Jama'ah and Jamaat Islami, as a political party. So they are dominating the scene up till now. Our progress is slow but steady. And now it is within Allah, His decision and command. But this movement has now entered the second generation. And inshallah, it will continue. The success or otherwise is in His hands. Our duty is to strive and try to be on the right path. The success, when and through whom it comes, is for Allah to decide. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the close attention.
We will take a short break for... Dear panelists, you have heard Dr. Israr's discourse on a very vast subject. It has covered centuries, in fact, the arrival of Islam in the subcontinents, and then its development, and finally the creation of Pakistan in 1947 and its aftermath. Now the floor is open for discussion.
I have a point of clarification initially. You mentioned that in the 20th century there are 4 mujaddids.
First of all, I never used the word mujaddid for them. Mujaddids were Ahmad Sarhandi, Shah Waliullah, Sayyid Ahmad Barelvi, and Sheikhul Hind Maulana Mahmud Hassan.
Right.
But 4, you may say, da'is and callers.
That's what I was not sure about. Now, the question that I have is a comparative one, in relation to Badi al-Zaman Said Nursi in the Ottoman Empire, who was born in 1877. And briefly about his life is that after World War I, after the defeat of the Ottoman army, he began to preach the idea that the only destiny for Islam in the Ottoman Empire in Turkey as well as in the Muslim world is the preservation of faith, Iman, as you have suggested. He has the same ideas about Iman. And that's why he went in full force to preserve Iman in a secular Turkish republic, the Turkish Republic of Turkey that was established after 1924. And he never thought about re-establishing the Islamic socio-economic and political system. To him, that was part of his old days, the old Said. But his major intention was to preserve Iman in a new age. Now, you seem to be somewhat different. You seem to be saying that
I'm very much different.
Iman alone is not sufficient, but it has to be reconstituted in the context of the state. Whereas for Said Nursi, he is saying that Iman without an Islamic state can be preserved, even in the most radical secular entity, such as the Turkish Republic of Turkey today.
Yes, the last thing that you have said, I agree 100%. Iman can be preserved. We have the example of the Ashab of Kahf, people of the cave. They saved their Iman by running off from the society and hiding in a cave for 300 years, more than 300 years. So I would compare Sayyid Nursi's movement to Deobandis, the ulama, the big people who based Deoband. They wanted to preserve the Iman as Aqidah and the knowledge of Quran and Sunnah. But this phenomenon is actually exclusive. Iqbal was the first to revive the concept of Islam as a deen. And then, first attempt was made by Abul Kalam, second by Maududi. And it is progressing. And I quote the ayah from the Quran, for you especially, لَتَرْكَبُنَّ طَبَقًا عَنْ طَبَقٍ. The big purpose which was achieved by the Prophet in 20 years, that cannot be achieved in one generation now. لَتَرْكَبُنَّ طَبَقًا عَنْ طَبَقٍ. We shall rise from level to level to level. And now we are very, very near, very close to that final end, inshallah.
I'd like to ask you a question about science, natural science. But let me first say, I enjoyed your talk more than any other talks which I've also enjoyed. I thought this was the best one for me that was, so thank you for that. It was a rich discussion. I want to ask you about the role of Western science. Science is the very basis of our technology, and the philosophy behind science and technology is secular. It has a long history of becoming secular. It is the dominance of our science and technology which has led to our imperial domination. Without it, we would not have achieved that domination over some 200 or 300 years, which has happened. And it is the ownership and control of that science and technology which forms today the military technology which is still totally dominant around the world. So my question is around the role of science in your Renaissance, in the Islamic Renaissance. You have mentioned it time and again in this talk today, but it is not clear to me what relation Islam has to Western natural science.
In one of my previous talks, I specified there are two knowledges. One is acquired, one is revealed. And this acquired knowledge is also Islamic, because we are studying the universe, which is the work of God. The Quran, the scriptures, the Torah, the Bible, they are words of God. So there is no distinction or agreement between the two. If we find that there is someone, it is due to our knowledge, lack of knowledge. So we have to adopt it. It is not un-Islamic at all. It is Islamic. But thought governs this. This is not the governing force. Governing force is the thought, the ideas.
May I come in here? See, nothing wrong with science and technology per se as such. But when it becomes scientism, a total metaphysical worldview, that only science can explain everything, then that is something un-Islamic, un-Quranic.
Can I ask a question about at various points in your talk you hinted to your view of Hinduism and the relationships between Hinduism and Islam in India over the last 200 or so years in particular. And you talked about, you were critical of Hinduism for at least two reasons. One is that it has a propensity to always assimilate another religion and make it its own and eradicate the distinctiveness of the other. And your second criticism was that there was a deep antagonism amongst Hindus in India towards Islam, which is one of the major arguments for partition. Can you just locate those feelings towards Hinduism in a broader context for me? Was it colonialism? Was it the arrival of the British which led to these problematic relationships, an awkward relationship between Hindus and Muslims, and before that perhaps there was more constructive coexistence? Or have there always been major antagonisms between Muslims and Hindus in India?
My response would be, first of all, Hinduism is not a religion. It's a conglomeration of very different beliefs. Hindus themselves say it's not religion, it's a culture. And all who live in India should adopt that culture. They shouldn't maintain their separate identity. When they live in India, they are the sons of the soil now, so they should be integrated into the culture. Now, as regarding the opposition to Pakistan, it had two factors. Number one, dislike of Islam, but more so was division of India. Bharat was very sacred to them. They call it Mother Bharat, Bharat Mata. How come? India will be divided? No. So that was more effective. But there was extremist Hindus who had the idea to exterminate Islam and Muslims from this soil. They are foreign elements, they have to go out. There have been slogans in Bombay, Musalman ke do asthan, Pakistan ya Qabristan. Muslims of India have two places to go, either to graveyard or to Pakistan. Go away from here now. So it was a religious affair also. They had started a movement of converting Muslims to Hinduism in the regions where there was no Islamic knowledge. Some chief of the tribe accepted Islam, and now all the people, but they didn't even know the kalma. First, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasul. Even that they couldn't pronounce. Especially the Mewatis, round about Delhi. So Tablighi Jamaat worked a lot for them, but they were converting them. So as to reclaim, they were from us, and they must come back. Then the Britishers also, especially the conservatives in England, they broadened this gap and increased the enmity due to their policy of divide and rule, divide and rule. If they come together, they'll throw us out. Let them fight each other, divide and rule. So the oil was added to this burning fire by this British policy. And when they left a bone of contention between Bharat and Pakistan, Kashmir. Go on fighting, go on fighting, go on fighting. Remain friends, our friends, both of you, but fight each other. Go on, go on. The same continuation of the divide and rule policy.
I have a couple of things to say. Firstly, I want to go back to your discourse this morning, and very interesting, very informative. What I was trying to reflect on was this, that we are looking at, in this period of 150 years, we are looking at Iqbal, we are looking at the thought of Azad, we are looking at the thought of Maududi, yourself, and others. And I go back to the time of around when Iqbal was born, 1870s. And 1870s, I think, in some ways also becomes a historically very significant period in the British rule, because that is the time when practically, I think, in this northwest segment of the country, there are several movements that emerged, which primarily were a response to the British presence, the British dominance. They did not like the dominance. They were also a response to the Christian missionaries and their work. They maybe to some extent were also protective against the influences of the faiths which already existed within the society, but primarily I think they were defensive. And in that movement there was amongst the Hindus the Arya Samaj movement which started, which became very strong. The Sikhs had the Singh Sabha movement, which started. Before that, it was the Nirankaris and the Kukas. So the first, 1871, the Kukas movement, the Qadianis and the Aligarh movement. All these are the movements which started at that point of time. I see there a trend of thought that initially emerges from, which is, I think, informed through the works of all of them, like Iqbal and Azad and even Maududi, where the thought was to find a model or to find identity within a pluralistic setting. You see, now somewhere around 1920, 1930, that period is significant because the rift between Gandhi and Jinnah, which led then ultimately to emergence of another kind of thought of separation. So I am wondering here that if we even go back to 1930 speech of Allama Iqbal, he is talking of a very broad concept of federalism. He is talking of a very broad concept of federalism, true federalism, where the regions have a certain level of freedom and liberty, but they live as a pluralistic entities. Is it possible, in your judgment or in your reflection, that if Nehru and Jinnah had got along, we would not be thinking of so many of these things here today?
Well, these ifs, they can have so many answers.
Yes.
And what I want to point out is that what you are saying about Iqbal is partially true. Because at that time, we could never think of independence from the Britishers. So what he was seeking at that time was the grouping of the provinces on the basis of population. So there should be one province of Muslim majority, So that was practical, pragmatic. But then he said in this same lecture, for me it is destiny that an independent Islam Muslim state will exist and be established in the northwest of India. But that was not a proposal. On those conditions, nobody could think that Britishers will go. Had not the Second World War happened, the Britishers would have never gone from here.
Dr. Mumtaz Ahmed.
Israr Sahib, you left the Jamaat-e-Islami in the 1950s, and I happen to have read your statement that you delivered at Machi God Ijtima, and I must admit that it's the most articulate and profoundly argued statement. with wit and sarcasm and also with passion. And even today, I think it remains probably the best critique of the turnaround of the Jamaat-e-Islami. I have two questions. Did you at any time after you left the Jamaat had the opportunity of meeting Maulana Maududi and discussing with him the issues that divided you? Secondly, at the same time or around that time, both Maulana Wahiduddin Ahmed and Maulana Amin Ahsan Islai also left the Jamaat-e-Islami. How is your position different from the position taken by these two other stalwarts of the Jamaat? And thirdly,
it will be difficult for me to remember.
Go ahead. But please do remember I have a third question.
Not a question paper. First of all, I didn't meet Maulana Maududi for 5 years after leaving Jamaat-e-Islami. But in 1962, I was going for Hajj for the first time. So I came over to Lahore from Montgomery. 1962. That was my first Hajj. So I came and talked to him. That Maulana, my difference stands where it was. Rather, it is more intense. But I love you. I'm thankful to you because you gave us the idea and all that. So I want that you also clear your heart from my side. He said, I have nothing in my heart against you. But then, that was not the time for discussion. I tried to discuss because when I went to Hajj, he also came because, the founding session of Rahmatullahi al-Islami was going to be held. After I left, he was invited. So I met him in Makkah, in Mina, in Medina, and wanted to discuss with him. I said, Maulana, do you not up till now think that some mistake has been? So he was furious. He said, the same question I'm asking you. Have you not up till now understood your mistake? So I stopped. Number one. Number two was Wahiduddin and Maulana Islahi. Maulana Islahi was 100% in agreement with me. But his position was that had Maulana Maududi kept the environment of mutual consultation, we would not have left Jamaat-e-Islami. So leaving Jamaat is something else and the difference of opinion is something else. As for Wahiduddin Khan, he actually attacks the basic thought of Iqamatuddin. So he has differed and gone away from the basic ideology of Jamaat-e-Islami, but not Maulana Islahi.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I also wish to say that I enjoyed today's talk a great deal and I learned from it. I understand even better, I think, your desire for and your aim to have an Islamic state. And I understand better also why you do not accept Muslims and really Islam only being given in the states rights to practice their religion and other human rights, but not having full political rights, indeed not having their own Islamic state. And I certainly do not expect you to change your views on this whatsoever. I wonder, however, if you can fully understand why non-Muslims would almost certainly oppose any kind of Islamic state, especially one in which they live, and did not grant them political rights as well as human rights on an equal basis with Muslims. And also, given that you say, yes, you want an Islamic state, you're saying now, first and foremost in Pakistan, but the real idea is to have either Islamic states around the world or to have the world become an Islamic state, then I wonder if you can understand why for a good many of us non-Muslims, that would only mean difficulty, first of all, but also probably conflict, because the rights would not be given fully. And if you're thinking of a world Islamic state, then that would be conflict throughout the whole of the world. So I'm wondering if you can understand that, which I think you can, but then what would you say about that? how would then conflict cease to be as long as there were non-Muslims in this world?
First of all, we hope that when a model Islamic state is established somewhere on this globe, most of the humanity and mankind will see the truth with their own eyes and accept Islam. But I don't say that the conflict will be over. There will remain certain persons, but in the revolutionary terminology, all the people in Russia were not communists. But they had to accept the communist order. It is the revolutionary force that establishes its order of its choice. And the other have to obey. This is the rule. This has been the rule throughout. But let me quote about Muslims, not to speak of Islam. About Islam, let me quote an incident. Omar, the second caliph, went to Damascus. And there he saw a Jew begging in the market. He called the governor for explanation. How come? When he was young, you were taking jizya from him. And now when he is old, you have thrown him into the street to beg. Fix the allowance for him. Just like the allowances for Muslims. This is Islam. The basic right that the Islamic Caliphate underwrites all the basic human necessities for every citizen. It covers the non-Muslims also. Number two, about the Muslim kingship. Let me quote Ben Gurion, what he said. The golden era of our diaspora was the Muslim Spain. In what a high position were the Jews over there.
One small comment there, if I may. That's only this, that I think the way possibly lots of these golden eras have been defined are such that the golden era of the Indian history in the last millennium is considered to be Akbar's rule. Akbar's rule.
Yes. And the Muslim ascendancy was at its zenith during Akbar's rule.
No.
But Islam had gone.
Yes, that's what I mean. You see, so therefore, I think to try and relate the faith of the ruler to the golden era possibly could be erroneous.
But that is not our golden era.
Yeah,
that is not the golden era of Islam.
Not of Islam,
yes.
But for the people.
Ibrahim.
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to draw our attention that the journal we edit in Hartwood Seminary in the past issue, the combined issue of July and October of last year, we published a special issue on Pakistan and Allama Maududi. And I'm sorry that we don't have a copy of that here, but we have like 13 major articles on Maududi and Pakistan, which are significant in many ways. Now, the question that I have is about two major events that you have referred to only briefly. The event of partition, the partition of India in 1947, and the consequence of the partition, the creation of an Indian nation state and a Pakistani nation state. Now I want to talk briefly about the nation state of Pakistan. If I understand you correctly, you are saying from your own perspective that the nation state of Pakistan that has come on the heels of partition has not established through Islamic ideas and through Islamic rule and through Imam. So in that sense, for the past 56 years or so, the nation state of Pakistan has not been a true Islamic state. That's
100% agreed.
Okay. Therefore, my question is, within the partition, at least 4 or 5 million innocent civilians were killed on both sides. Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus, all sorts of innocent people. Now, was it worth it to kill so many people for a secular nation state of Pakistan that you disagree with?
Brother, I was not involved in that killing.
No, I'm not asking you. No. True. But the fact is...
And neither the leaders of Congress or Muslim League
but that doesn't
would
matter.
envisage that this would happen.
Yeah, but partition, the whole idea of partition, gave rise to so much killing within India and Pakistan.
Yes,
But-
it's a sad
And from an
affair.
Islamic perspective, that's not worth it to establish a non-Islamic state later on.
Frequent.
I agree.
We have to stop here.
I have two questions. I want to learn, you see, but I may ask private.
One quick question.
Yes. The first question is how do you consider Imam Rabbani and Shah Dahlawi in your...
In Mujaddid, I have named the first Mujaddid.
Yeah, Mujaddid, but I think, as far as I know, maybe my knowledge is a very little and limited. Imam Rabbani, he didn't aim an Islamic state. So, how do you consider Imam Rabbani's views?
I have said, that the Islam during these centuries was gradually reduced to mazhab.
Yeah, I mean,
And
when you consider his views
mysticism is
and
also
ideas,
a private affair.
yes,
Iman is also a private personal affair.
yeah,
Personal piety. That was the goal of most of the Mujaddids.
yes, okay. Thank you, Brad.
Dear panelists,
Only one fact. In terms of Islamic intellectual history in South Asia, Shah Waliullah of Delhi and Imam Rabbani Sirhindi, we have one major Canadian Muslim woman scholar on that in the USA, Professor Marcia Hermanson, who's known to some of our faculty in the seminary. She's somewhere in Chicago, not at the University of Chicago.
She's DePaul.
DePaul University, who has done tremendous work on Sirhindi, especially on Loyola University. Thank you. Yes. So we are doing something. Thank you so much.